Hello and welcome to our final item of business today, portfolio questions on environment, climate change and land reform. And just actually remind members first of all that questions 2, 4, 6 and 7 are grouped together. So I'll take all the supplementaries on those questions at the end of question 7. First question, however, is from Jamie Green. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how its climate change targets could be supported by the recommendations in SSE's report, A Green Print for Building a Cleaner, More Resilient Economy.
Cabinet Secretary Roseanna Cunningham.
Well, I welcome SSE's report and I do note that its 5 policy areas complement the Scottish Government's strategy for creating a green, resilient, wellbeing economy. It is clear that meeting our world-leading targets to reduce carbon emissions will require a truly national endeavour involving significant public and private investment, and I hope SSE and others will play their part.
Jamie Green.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that helpful response? Can I just first of all check if the current net zero target is still in place, despite the difficulties we've had with coronavirus over the last few months? And also, if the Cabinet Secretary could comment on the home improvement stimulus proposal in the SSE report, which recommended that government should move towards phasing out gas and oil heating for homes. Is that something the Scottish Government is actively looking towards, and when might we expect to see some progress on that?
Roseanna Cunningham.
Well, yes, I'm sorry, Presiding Officer, yes, all the targets are in place. They are, as the member will recall, statutory targets, and they are now fixed both for 2045 in terms of net zero, but in terms of 2030 for the 75% emissions reduction. So until and unless Parliament decides to make any changes to those targets, they will remain in place. I think the member is probably well aware that this is a question that's perhaps a little outside my portfolio. The home improvement stimulus that he is talking about is extremely important. We did announce as part of our budget the new heat transition deal. We've increased support for Energy Efficient Scotland, and there's a heat transition deal to come online in phases over the coming months to support economic recovery in the energy efficiency, heat and low carbon energy sectors. We've also introduced a Heat Network Scotland bill to Parliament, and there will of course be further publications this year on heat decarbonisation and an update in the Energy Efficient Scotland route map. So there is quite a lot still in place and intended for the future. There are some aspects of the whole process in terms of decarbonisation with which we will require to work very closely with the UK government if we are to be able to achieve what we want to achieve in respect of that. But that is an ongoing conversation.
And a brief supplementary from Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And could I ask the Cabinet Secretary what she's considering and what discussions she's having across government portfolios to consider the opportunity to use incentives or grants to deliver emission reductions by businesses and to support businesses working in renewables manufacturing and the circular economy as we start to move out of the COVID lockdown? Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary Roseanna Cunningham.
As the member probably realises, there are a significant number of conversations taking place across government right now in respect of managing our way out of the immediate economic, as well as managing our way towards a green economic recovery. Within that, there will be as many incentives as we can reasonably expect. Although all colleagues will be aware that there are now very significant financial challenges for governments everywhere to manage our way through as well. So the conversations are continuing, bilaterals with colleagues, but also broader conversations and discussions. And these are very live issues for managing our way out of the current very difficult situation that we're in.
Thank you. And question number 2, Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what the current fine is for illegally dumping rubbish in the countryside, and whether it will increase this as soon as possible to deter this behaviour.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, fly tipping is, of course, illegal, dangerous and unnecessary, and I'm disappointed that there has been an increase in fly tipping during the lockdown period. I know that this will be of significant concern to landowners and to the communities affected. In 2014, we increased the penalty for fly tipping to a minimum fine of £200 and a maximum penalty of £40,000, with a range of measures in between. And in addition to fines, there is currently a national campaign to help people understand how to manage waste and work by SEPA to check the credentials of businesses that have started offering waste uplifts.
Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for that answer. Will the Government actively encourage COSLA, Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, to discuss with local councils the setting up of mobile cameras to cover areas where being blighted by illegal dumping, to detect car registration numbers in order to prosecute those drivers?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we are already working closely with SEPA and local authorities to ensure that we do have effective prevention and enforcement measures in place. Ideally, we would be able to identify the individuals responsible for fly tipping and make them pay for cleaning it up. SEPA has a vital role to play in ensuring that the public and waste carriers understand their responsibilities and in targeting illegal waste carriers and prosecuting them when necessary. Local authorities can actually already use cameras and other technology to target fly tipping hotspots, and can also already provide support for private landowners in relation to fly tipping. And there are a number of local fly tipping partnerships which are engaged. I would encourage landowners to contact their local authority or local partnership to understand what support, as I agree wholeheartedly that prevention and deterrence is the most beneficial approach.
And question number 4, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to address the reported increase of incidents of fly tipping in the countryside.
Rosanna Cunningham.
Responsibility for managing fly tipping does rest with local councils as part of their role in delivering waste services, and there has been disruption to services during recent weeks. Limited access to other services, however, is no excuse for fly tipping. I'm pleased to see that the situation is now much better and continuing to improve. The reopening of household waste recycling centres this week is another step forward in that regard, and several councils have reinstated uplifts, and we will consider what else can be done working with COSLA, SEPA and Zero Waste Scotland.
Murdo Fraser.
Okay, I can thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. I would absolutely agree. There is never any excuse for fly tipping, albeit we have seen an increase while council tips have been closed, but now they are reopening. Hopefully that problem will start to lessen. But my understanding of the current law is that ultimately it is the responsibility of the landowner to bear the costs of clearing up rubbish in the countryside on their land if the fly tipper cannot be identified. And does the Cabinet Secretary think that that law is still fair and appropriate? And is it not time to review that law?
Cabinet Secretary.
We would be keeping all aspects of this under review. It is a continuing conversation. SEPA, who are looking quite closely at a variety of different ways to address the issue. I think it has been clearly quite exacerbated by the most recent experience, and I do understand the frustration of landowners when they, by law, become responsible for what is actually on their land. And Murdo Fraser will know that that is something which is pretty much embedded in law in Scotland. The big issue becomes how to manage the situation, how to make the identification, how to be able to do the enforcement. There is compensation provision available, but that of course does mean identifying the individuals who have carried out the particular act. However, it is something that I have been, not specifically what Murdo Fraser is talking about, the wider issue of what has happened over the last couple of months is something that I have had a conversation with SEPA about, and I've asked SEPA to have a look at whether or not there are different and better ways to manage the situation. So I expect that conversation will continue.
And question 6, Claire Adamson.
To ask the Scottish Government what support it can offer local authorities to address reported increases in fly tipping and promote waste management as we begin to open recycling centres.
Rosanna Cunningham.
Well, the Scottish Government has established a waste sector forum that brings together key partners in the waste sector to ensure that we are working closely together during the pandemic. The forum includes local authority representation, as well as waste industry bodies, SEPA and Zero Waste Scotland. Communication with the public about responsible waste management has been a key, alongside a focus on recovering services that households and businesses rely on. We've been working on developing a route map for a green recovery as part of our broader work on economic recovery, and I see recycling and the circular economy as a key element of that.
And Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for your answer. While the reopening of the recycling centres, some with limited use, has to be welcomed, of course the safety of workers and the safe operation is absolutely paramount. I can ask the Cabinet Secretary if she has discussions with COSLA and with the wider waste industry about appropriate safety measures and appropriate PPE being available to workers in the waste management sector.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it is right that the personal health and well-being of those working in the sector is safeguarded at all times. We've published guidance which was jointly worked on with COSLA, between the Scottish Government and COSLA, to support local authorities in the reopening and the operation of recycling centres. And alongside the guidance, Zero Waste Scotland has commenced a national level communications programme to advise the public on arrangements for visiting the recycling centres. And that includes a very clear message about zero tolerance approach to abuse of staff, for example. The guidance on recycling centres, the recycling centres, is intended to be read in conjunction with other published guidance, and that includes guidance from Health Protection Scotland and the UK Waste Industry Safety and Health Forum. So all of that has been part and parcel of the conversation that we have been having with local authorities about how to safely reopen recycling centres. And it has been a matter of as much concern for local authorities as it has been for us.
Thank you. And question number 7, Michelle Ballantyne.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it's taking to help reduce fly tipping and littering.
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm sorry, Presiding Officer, I keep jumping the gun there. The Scottish Government published a revised Code of Practice on Litter and Refuse in 2018, which sets out statutory guidance on the responsibilities of local authorities and other duty holders, and promotes a focus on prevention. As mentioned in earlier responses, we have recently developed with COSLA and local authorities a national waste management marketing campaign and web resource that sets out how the public can manage waste responsibly at this difficult time, including messages on fly tipping and litter prevention.
Michelle Ballantyne.
Thank you. Over the last week, with the easing right as planned, and we've seen thousands of people flocking to beauty spots across Scotland, including in the borders and along the East Lothian coast to enjoy the sun. Many of these visitors were not respectful of the environment, dumping beer cans, cigarette butts and other litter behind in their wake, leaving the locals to clear up the mess. One of the complaints I've had from quite a few constituents is that because all the car parks are closed, the large litter bins are not accessible to those visitors. Has the government considered reopening this and actually providing litter bins to prevent the constant dropping of litter all over the place.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think as the member probably could well understand, we are having conversations almost on a constant basis about aspects of the lockdown and how to manage behaviours that we see developing. So yes, there are active conversations about how best we can deal with the issue that arises around local hotspots, and of course, first and foremost, a public health issue that gives us concern. But equally, there are more indirect results, which is one of the things that the member is discussing. So the issue about car parks and public toilets, etc., is a bigger issue in respect of the public health message. It may very well be that there can be ways in which we can look more carefully at how the availability of litter bins is made more easily accessible. As the member will, however, be aware, this is a discussion that has to be had with quite a large number of organisations. Everybody from the national parks to the local authorities, and there may be in different areas different solutions which would be required to be thought about. What we also have got to be a little careful about is not to incentivise even worse behaviour, and I go back to the public health issues arising around people perhaps not paying as much attention as they should be doing.
Thank you very much. Now, following the group's questions, we're going to go back to question 3, Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when a review will be carried out on the impact coronavirus has had on making progress towards its environmental targets.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the Scottish Government has, of course, set many targets to encourage progress in Scotland on many different aspects of environmental protection and climate change mitigation. I'm to understand the full impact of the COVID-19 crisis on these targets, and we will continue to review the impacts of COVID-19 as part of ongoing monitoring.
Maurice Golden.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. But of course, a litany of environmental targets were missed or were on track to fail before the coronavirus. Now a host of measures, understandably, face delays. The deposit return scheme goes ahead nonetheless. So will the Cabinet Secretary guarantee that every vending machine for DRS will be built here in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm not going to make that kind of global guarantee. We are actively discussing the next steps in the progress towards DRS and the discussions that take place around the setting up of a scheme administrator, and a lot of the conversations the member might be interested in having about DRS are conversations which will, of course, require the very active involvement of the scheme administrator when that is finally set up.
And we've got some supplementaries here. First of all, Sarah Boyack, then Richard Lyle. Sarah Boyack first.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm keen to know the Cabinet Secretary's response to the demands made by over 80 civil society organisations who want to see the Scottish Government investing in a green recovery and a wellbeing economy as we come out of COVID-19, so that we transform society and economy to meet our first share of the climate emissions cuts while greatly enhancing biodiversity and our environment.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I can reassure Sarah Boyack that this is a very active conversation right now across virtually all portfolios, as well as the Economic Recovery Group, which is chaired by Benny Higgins. I've also set up a revised group, which we're calling the Sustainable Advisory Group, which is targeting first and foremost towards the requirements that we made to, or the promises that we made to Parliament about updating the climate change plan in respect of the 2030 targets. Now, that's all active work, which is currently ongoing, and we very much welcome all the various contributions that are beginning to emerge across society, and I'm very grateful that they are beginning to emerge in that way. I try to keep abreast of them as much as possible, and I very much hope that we will see even more come forward, because we all, I think, agree that what we have to do now is build an economic recovery that looks better than where we were before.
And Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, we've seen increased rates of walking and cycling in recent months, coupled with improved air quality in our towns and cities. What investment is the Scottish Government making as part of its response to the pandemic to encourage the people to use sustainable transport methods beyond the COVID outbreak?
Cabinet Secretary.
Been very clear in its support for sustainable travel, and I'm absolutely certain that Michael Matheson, the Transport Secretary, would want me to remind the member of the £10 million for Spaces for People, which is funding pop-up cycle lanes and wider pavements to help ensure safe infrastructure for walking and cycling at this time, and that has initial investment has now been tripled to £30 million. So that's a very immediate commitment to the immediate scenario, but that does sit alongside the broader national transport strategy, which continues to provide guiding principles for transport, including stressing the importance of walking, wheeling. It will form part of Scotland's route map out of COVID-19. But of course, transport is going to be a complex and complicated area for working in terms of the green economic recovery. I'm nervous about a sudden rush back to cars by people who transport. So we have to think right across all forms of transport as to how we can ensure that we continue to have the emptier roads and the cleaner air that we currently do.
Thank you. And we're moving now to question 5. Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its plans to continue the Solway Barnacle Goose Management Scheme beyond 2020.
And this is for the Minister, Marie Gougeon.
We're currently reviewing all goose management schemes and have begun work to explore what future schemes might look like, and that includes the scheme on the Solway. And that process will involve Scottish Natural Heritage working with Scottish Government officials, as well as us liaising with the Solway Goose Group, and that includes farmers, landowners, the RSPB, Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust and Sporting and Festu.
Oliver Mundell.
I thank the Minister for that answer, but I feel certainty is needed, because not only is this important for the farmers, it's also important for the wider tourism industry locally and the environment, and all those benefits are underpinned by this crucial funding. So I'm hoping that the Minister might be able to look and see if the Scottish Government can guarantee a year's continued funding at this point, rather than leaving the groups that she mentions in the lurch at this very, very difficult time.
Minister.
I completely understand the importance of this, as Oliver Mundell has highlighted. And I just want to say that the development work that's happening right now and that will continue on through 2020, that future provision will be starting to take shape by early next year. And the government anticipates that, at least for the Solway, a goose management scheme would be, which is broadly similar to the current one, is the most likely option. So we want to give them that attitude. And so that's where I feel that there wouldn't really be need for an extension at this time, because there is still enough time for us to conduct that review and make sure that any other level of support is in place.
And it's not on Solway, but it is on geese, I think, from Lee MacArthur, a supplementary.
Thank you very much, President Officer. Yeah, I'll take you to the other end of the country. The Minister will be aware that measures to tackle the large and growing resident greyland goose population in Orkney had to be shelved due to COVID. This has left local farmers having to spend more time and resources desperately trying to control numbers. So can I ask the Minister, therefore, to look at using the money that would have been spent by SNH on those measures earlier in the year to help cover some of the increased costs faced by local farmers, including the cost of cartridges?
Minister.
That is something that I'd be happy to look at, because there is the potential there to that type of support if the goose control is done through the cooperative adaptive management scheme, and of course observes all the relevant protocols. And I would just add and say to Lee MacArthur that we are looking at a range of ways of providing support, and an example of that, we've recently secured an EU agreement that goose meat from Orkney, from the Orkney scheme, can be sold throughout Scotland. So again, I appreciate how important an issue it is, and yeah, we will look at ways in which we can offer support.
Thank you very much. And question 8, Tom Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government for what reason it has delayed the deadline for the creation of a nitrogen balance sheet.
Cabinet Secretary Rosanna Cunningham.
Whilst our immediate focus has to be on responding to the COVID-19 crisis, we also remain fully committed to our climate change goals. This includes the establishment of a national nitrogen balance sheet. Parliament recently unanimously agreed a limited extension to the deadline for the development phase of this project, and this represents a pragmatic flexibility intended to minimise any risks to the quality of the balance sheet from factors associated with the current public health crisis. For example, the project will need to engage widely across areas such as agriculture, waste, in order to be effective.
Tom Mason.
I thank the Cabinet Minister Secretary for that reply. While none of us doubt the importance of focusing all the government's resources on tackling COVID-19 at the moment, people might struggle to understand why that means the climate change deadline that is 16 months away cannot be met. The policy memorandum for the second coronavirus bill says that no stakeholder consultation for the nitrogen balance sheet was possible in the time available. Has that consultation been undertaken now? And if not, when will it take place?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think, in fairness to the member, I'm not sure that he's precisely understanding that the Climate Change Act was really only triggered in March 2020. The commencement of the Act was only in March 2020, literally just prior to the COVID lockdown. Therefore, we had to look very carefully at how we were going to manage things. The amendment to the emergency bill, the COVID #2 bill, was unanimously accepted, and we did make sure that we spoke across all the parties to ensure understanding and agreement in respect of this. It is an issue that the wider statutory requirements around the balance sheet changed, but in order to actually do the work which would be required, we would have had some significant difficulty managing it through the lockdown. So what we've done is simply look at a very modest extension of the time for that in order to ensure that it is done as could be. This will be the very first nitrogen balance sheet for Scotland, and I would not be happy if we ended up with something that wasn't as good a quality as it could be for reasons that we couldn't control in this year, but we can control by allowing a longer space of time to develop it.
Cabinet Secretary, members, thank you very much, and ministers, thank you very much indeed. That actually concludes our portfolio questions for today. Parliament will resume at 2 p.m. next Tuesday in plenary session, but until then, thank you very much, and I close this session, close this meeting.